This is Six Music.
BBC Radio 6 Music documentaries, telling the stories in music that matter.
It's what we do.
It's the beauty of Six Music.
Find out more at the 6 Music website. Now, 6 Music documentaries present Bowie's Heroes with Matt Everett.
I've always loved David Bowie, from the cheesy pop and folk he made before he was famous to Ziggy, Young Americans, the Berlin trilogy, the 80s Blonde Bouffon, Labyrinth, Heathen, everything. For me, he's the most inventive artist in rock history. And what makes him so fascinating is that his influences extend far beyond any other rock star. He's the product of 1,000 different obsessions, and you can hear them all in his songs. Over the next 2 nights, we'll look at the people who've inspired Bowie, as well as hearing from some of the famous musicians whose lives he's changed. I'm Matt Everett, and this is Bowie's Heroes.
Du könntest schwimmen wie Delfine. Delfine ist schön.
Born as David Jones in the years directly after World War II, the young Bowie's first musical obsession was jazz. Introduced to trad jazz by his brother, he learnt to play saxophone aged 12 and was taught by this man, Ronnie Ross. And there's always been sax on Bowie records, even to this day. It's something he's never, ever felt the need to shake off. But it was rock and roll that provided Bowie with his first real hero.
Anything on rock and roll seemed to be there seemed to be so little of it that when it did appear on television, it seemed like the most like the holy grail, especially if it was from America. They'd show a clip from a movie. I remember getting so excited when they showed Little Richard from I think the film was called Disc Jockey Jamboree, and it was just amazing to actually see him moving. He'd just been a record to me before, you know.
Bowie loved Fats Domino, Chuck Berry and especially Little Richard. Elvis represented raw danger, but Richard was more theatrical, a showman. On stage there was this feeling of a man acting a persona, something that obviously made an impression on David. And on this track, Lisa Jane by Davy Jones and the King Bees, Bowie's first ever single from 1964, you can hear his love of early rock and roll.
A little Liza Jane, a little Liza Jane, little Liza Jane.
By 1965, Bowie's heroes were guitar bands, the Kinks, the Yardbirds, and especially The Who. However, Bowie's mod phase wasn't to last long.
Just look through your window. Look who sits outside. Little me is waiting, standing through the night. When you walk out through your door, I'll wave my flag and shout, ah, beautiful baby, my burning desire started on Sunday. Give me your heart and I'll love you till Tuesday.
That is Love Me Till Tuesday, a Bowie track from 1967 from what fans call his Anthony Newley phase. Anthony Newley was a talented and successful actor, composer, singer and songwriter in the 50s and 60s with a theatrical Cockney chappy singing style which Bowie totally adopted. Newley also starred in a surreal cult sitcom called Gurney Slade, which appealed to Bowie's surreal sense of humour. Here's a clip.
A half-hour television show. Half an hour to put the world right. And I can do without that lot back there as well. How would you like your egg done, dear? The golden years of British entertainment. So much for Shakespeare and Sophocles. I prithee, husband, I will not trouble thee, my love, beyond thine intelligence, to what degree of hardness thou requirest in thine egg. Act 4, Scene 2, Omelette the Prince.
It was the television series that made me want to sing like him, not the records. It was very odd. In fact, The Strange World of Gurney Slade was the reason that I liked Tony Newley. It wasn't the other stuff, it wasn't the singles and all that. And that series really drew me to what he was trying to do, because I think he was a very talented guy.
I've been thinking about you, beep-bum-be-bum-be-bum.
And you can hear so much of where Bowie's voice styling came from at this time. This Newley track could be Bowie.
I'd like to fly away with you, beep-bum-be-bum. Sweet talking all the way with you, beep-bum-be-bum-be-bum.
Not all Bowie's early heroes were musical. In 1967, he started studying and performing with the mime artist Lindsay Kemp. Lindsay taught Bowie about physical poise and stagecraft. Bowie became, and still is, hugely aware of expressing himself physically during performances. Lindsay Kemp.
One day I popped into my agent's office. The typist secretaries very excitedly said, "Oh God, tell him about David Bowie." So I took home to my flat in Soho the album David Bowie. Loved it. Loved all the songs. Loved the musical quality of many of the songs. Loved its naivety. Loved the voice, which reminded me of two of my heroes. One being Jacques Brel and the other being Anthony Newley, you know. Of course, that night I fell in love, didn't I?
When I live my dream, I'll take you with me, riding on a golden horse. We'll live within my castle, with people there to serve you, happy at the sound of your voice.
A lot of Bowie songs in the late 60s have a naive quality, like this one, When I Live My Dream. But Bowie's next hero was altogether more otherworldly, Syd Barrett.
Trip to Ivanhoe, walk down to and fro. You have no word. Trip to a dream dragon. Hide your wings in a ghost tower. Sails cackling at every blade we break.
That's Clowns and Jugglers by the late Syd Barrett. Syd remains one of Bowie's most enduring heroes.
This kind of almost whimsical presence on stage. And the first rock performer that I saw wearing makeup. And I thought that was extraordinary. Like the 50s rock people, and even Presley used to wear like lots of mascara and eyeshadow and stuff like that. Dyed his hair and things. In England, there was a sense of trying to become other, develop an otherness. But there was a sense of, the very esoteric quality. And we in the medical profession call it pretentiousness.
Optimistic shining feet. The mad cat laughed at the man on the border. Hey ho, hop the Talbot, the wind saved blue and the leaves.
So if you want to trace the roots of glam rock, this is probably where it started. And you can also hear Syd's cosmic influence on Bowie's first hit, Space Oddity. There's nothing like seeing your friends become successful when you're not, even if you're David Bowie. Mark Bolan and David Bowie first met in 1964, becoming close friends. And while Bowie got a one-off hit in 1969 with Space Oddity, Bolan became a huge star a year later, breaking through with this single, Ride a White Swan.
Ride it all out like a bird in the sky was. Ride it all out like you were a bird. Fly it all out like an eagle in a sunbeam. Ride it all out like you were a bird. Wear a tall hat like the true.
Would Bowie have adopted a glam image if his mate wasn't scoring top 10 hits with glitter on his cheekbones? Who knows? Tony Visconti produced both of them, helping create Bolan's trademark hit sound.
It was a format. Mark and I innovated a lot of things. We had a T-Rex sound. that by that time you could wake me up in the middle of the night and put me in a studio and I could produce it straight away, and so could Mark. And it was an enviable formula. It still holds up. Every group who wants me wants that T-Rex sound, or Bowie wants that T-Rex sound. He's constantly looking for it too. It's made up of a number of components. I'd gladly tell you what they are. I mean, the main ingredient, of course, was Mark Bolan.
And the pair recorded together on the song The Prettiest Star.
I did that with old Bowie. Mark was just sort of going through the stumbling of learning to play lead guitar, and I liked some of the mistakes he was making, and I asked him if he'd come along and play lead guitar on it. I like guitarists who make a lot of mistakes, and Mark was making a lot of mistakes those days, and he produced a beautiful solo, and we lost the tapes.
But somebody found them.
Everything but cold fire. You will be my rest and peace, child. I moved up to take a place near you, so tired. It's the sky that makes you feel tried. It's a trick to make you see wide. It can all but break your heart.
Both Mark Bolan and David Bowie made an impact on a young Sinead O'Connor.
I remember seeing David Bowie on Mark Bolan's TV show the first time David Bowie was on telly in England. I remember distinctly being a very small child seeing it. David Bowie was just like a creature from another universe. Now in Ireland they were inclined not to publish a lot of his interviews because he was talking about controversial matters, particularly bisexuality. And I remember we'd be asking our parents, what's a bisexual? And we'd be told, be quiet, have your crisps. And so when David Bowie came along, we were like, oh my God, this is just so cool, you know.
Despite his status as a solo artist, Bowie's always worked with brilliant musicians and producers. He has a skill for picking the right person to realise his ideas, like prog keyboard legend Rick Wakeman, who played piano on Bowie's fourth album in '74, Hunky Dory, a record that included Changes, Oh You Pretty Things, and Life on Mars.
Got a call from David Cunningham. He said, I want to play you some stuff, and I went over there to his house, and he sat on a chair, took out a battered old 12-string guitar. He said, I want to play you some songs. He said, some songs are going to go on the new album. I don't want them to be guitar-based, acoustic guitar-based. I want them to stem from the piano. I don't know quite how to describe it. He played me these songs, one after the other, you know, Life on Mars, Changes and all. And every single song was just jaw-dropping. If it's Own Up time, a lot of people have said to me, oh, great, like the arrangements on Life on Mars, you must have worked so hard on it. The truth of the matter is, everybody worked around me because David gave me free rein to play.
And Life on Mars itself was inspired by big Broadway musical numbers that Bowie loved.
I almost thought that I would end up being a writer of musicals at the time. And I had a publisher who sent me a French song, Comme d'habitude. You have to do it from here, I think. And he said, but do you want to try and supply an English lyric to this? And I said, yeah, all right. Yeah, that'd be good exercise. So I wrote a lyric for it called Even a Fool Learns to Love, or some such drivel. It was really ropey, but I thought I'd make a few bob out of it. But I didn't. He said, yeah, thank you, this is really terrible. I'm giving it to somebody else. Next thing I heard, it had been done, rewritten again by Paul Anka, and it came back as My Way, and Sinatra had done it. I was so pissed. I thought, I'll write my own then. So I wrote Life on Mars.
It's a god-awful small affair to the girl with the mousy hair, but her mummy is yelling no, and her daddy has told her to go, but her friend is nowhere to be seen.
Hunky Dory is a favourite album for many people, including Wayne Coyne from the Flaming Lips.
No other record sounds like that. You know, he's got, I think there's a lot of Rick Wakeman playing utterly ornate stuff around these simple songs, but David Bowie uses weird chord structures. I mean, there's a lot of great songwriters who use these simple tricks of songwriting, but David Bowie's always been like, why is he? I don't know what he's playing there. Your mind tries to think it would be this or that as musicians or whatever. And he always goes these weird things. And on that record, that happens several times, almost every song, where you get these great surprises. And if you don't hear it for a while, you put it on, you're like, oh my God, all these songs are on this same record.
Take a look at the long man beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, wonder if you'll ever know who's in the best-selling show. Is their life on Mars?
Of course, Bowie's heroes aren't always musicians. Art has always been a passion of Bowie's. You can see touches of modernist painters like Eric Heichel and Egon Schiele in his album covers. And of course, Bowie loved Andy Warhol. He even wrote a song about him. And the pop singer and the pop artist did meet in 1971, but it wasn't the legendary event some would have hoped for.
The only touch point that we had was a pair of shoes that I was wearing from Anello and David. They were kind of real strange little jobs. I think they were yellow. As far as I remember, they were yellow with a 2-inch heel on them. And he really liked them. And of course, it occurred to me that the one reason he was getting kind of fascinated about it is he used to be a shoe designer. He used to, or at least he used to do a lot of drawings of shoes anyway, because I remember seeing them. So I thought, oh, well, he liked those then. Let's talk about my shoes. So we talked about my shoes. That's all I got out of him, really. It was also quite a disillusionment in its own way. But on the other hand, it supported everything I wanted to believe about him, is that, I was with Warhol for an hour and he said nothing except about my shoes. It just became, wow, that's a real anecdote.
Andy Warhol looks a scream, hang him on my wall. Andy Warhol, silver screen, can't tell them apart at all.
Because I'd bought the pop art thing that he was like, wasn't a real person. That he was just this creation, 15 years after that, I'd be looking at myself and saying, don't people realise I'm a human being?
Andy Warhol was also connected to the Velvet Underground, and Bowie made no secret of his love for the Velvet's experimental art rock. And when he was developing Ziggy Stardust, a lot of the whimsy of his songwriting style was abandoned for the more debauched lyrics of Velvet frontman Lou Reed.
See, I think of myself as a writer, and I had the single-minded goal when I was younger of using the rock and roll format as a form for adult-oriented songs. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. I said, no, this is an open season. There's not one person sitting around doing this. And I had it to myself. Thematically, things in movies and books, is considered a big, heavy deal in music, which is really crazy. I mean, it was like nothing. It was nothing. I mean, you wouldn't think twice of it. If it was anything other than a rock and roll pop song format, you wouldn't think twice about it.
And Bowie had been a fan of the Velvet Underground for a very long time.
I was one of that tiny bastion of Velvet Underground fans in London at the time, before they were kind of generally known. And I'd gotten into the Electric Circus to see the gig. I watched the entire show, and there were not many people in the audience because their star had begun to dim in New York. The whole band were there with Lou Reed singing the songs up front and all that. And I thought it was just tremendous, and I was singing along with the band, stuck right there at the apron of the stage, waiting for the man. White light, white hair, heroin. That kind of stuff. And then during the break, at the end of the show, I went backstage and I knocked on the door. And John Cale came to the door and I said, is Lou Reed? I'd love to talk. I'm from England and I'd love to talk because I'm in music too. And he said, wait here, he said. And so Lou comes out and we're sitting outside talking on the bench for about a quarter of an hour about writing songs and what it's like to be Lou Reed and all that. And afterwards, I was floating on a cloud and went back to my hotel. And the guy that I knew in New York, once I was over here, I said, I've just seen the Velvet Underground. I got to talk with Lou Reed for 15 minutes. He said, Yeah. He said, Lou Reed left the band last year. I said, I think you've been done. I said, well, who was that? He said, what did it look like? I said, it looked just like Lou Reed. He said, well, that's Doug Yule. He's the guy that took over from Lou Reed. I thought, what an imposter. Wow, that's incredible. It doesn't matter, really, because I still talk to Lou Reed as far as I'm concerned.
Bowie and Lou Reed became very good friends. Bowie produced his brilliant album Transformer in 1972 and took the Velvet's track White Light, White Heat and gave it the full Ziggy treatment.
White light, white light, gonna drive me out of my brain. White light, gonna make me feel so insane. White heat, take me down to my toes. White light's calling out, goodness knows. White light, gonna drive me out of my mind. White light's truly gonna make me blind. White light, take me way down to my toes. White light could kill me now, goodness knows.
The violent look of their suits, but still retain that kind of terrorist, we're ready for action kind of look.
As well as artists and musicians, many of Bowie's heroes are writers. The imagery in 1974's Diamond Dogs, a concept album about a decaying apocalyptic future world, has a lot in common with the work of beat writer William S. Burroughs. But the Diamond Dogs album and tour was originally inspired by George Orwell and his novel 1984.
It actually was a stone-cold version of 1984 as a musical. And it was, in fact, the first time I was rejected by a literary figure, because my office approached Mrs. Orwell, because I said, Office, I want to do 1984 as a musical. Go and get me the rights. So they duly trooped off to see Mrs. Orwell, who in so many words said, you've got to be out of your gourd. You think I'm turning this over to that as a musical? So they came back and said, sorry, David, you can't write it. I said, what do you mean? It's impossible. Of course I can write it. I said, no, she won't let you see. She won't give you the rights. She won't sell you the rights for any amount of money in the world.
Someday they won't let you. Now you must agree. The times they are a-telling and the changing isn't free. You've read it in the tea leaves and the tracks are on TV. Beware the savage shore of 1984.
Bowie always loved American music, but by 1975 he'd become obsessed with Philadelphia soul. Artists like the Dells, the Jays, and this band, the Ohio Players.
You're like a sailor with a girl on every shore, loving them now, for they won't see you no more.
Bowie's album, Young Americans, was a total homage to the Philly soul sound. Producer, Tony Visconti.
He heard this Philly sound, and he was into Soul Train. He spent a lot of time in New York. He just said, I've got to make an album like that. When I met David, when he was just turning 20, he was listening to R&B in those days too. He was greatly influenced by Ray Charles. He loved Little Richard, Etta James, and all. He had all those records, so this is something he always felt. It was always in him.
The album was recorded at Sigma Sound Studios in Philadelphia with a crack team of soul session musicians. Visconti remembers the band assembling for the first day of recording.
We saw this young guy come in with his guitar amp and his guitar, and followed by this tall black guy, and that was Luther Vandross. He was a kid from the Bronx. He was about 19 years old. And Carlos just banged something down on Young Americans, really played beautifully. And Luther is in the background. The hook wasn't written yet. It didn't have these words yet. Young Americans, young Americans. Luther was in there just humming the part, just working it out. And David said, that's incredible. That was actually the hook of the song.
The Young Americans album also included Fame, a song that featured one of Bowie's all-time heroes on backing vocals and guitar, John Lennon.
I met John firstly at some Elizabeth Taylor party. Elizabeth was a charming woman, and she got really kind of involved in coming down to Young Americans. But she invited me to some party, and she was there with, I think, John Lennon turned up, because he wanted to meet her too. He liked meeting new people. And we got together, and we got on very well, you know, and we'd always sort of, when I was in New York, I'd always like knock around with him, you know. And he came along to the studio, and we started working on... Carlos had a riff that he'd had in his head for some time, which I put to a standard called Foot Stomping by the Flares. Everybody young and old, learn how to rock and roll. Listen, here's something new. Everybody choking too. Foot stomping, 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 foot stomping. But we used what became the Fame riff. That was our take. We sort of changed it a bit. Had that Fame. And then, of course, I did the inevitable. When John came to the studio, I said, let's write something. I'm taking this chance by the horns, you know. I thought, I'm not letting go of this. And he said, yeah, great, you know, let's do something. So, well, what should we do? You know, and then Carlos said, how about that riff that we did with Foot Stomping? So we played that. And we just started, you know, chugging along with that and making up stuff as we were. And John just started singing,
By 1976, Bowie's main influences weren't musical, but spiritual. Consumed by a serious reliance on cocaine, Bowie became obsessed with the occult, conspiracy theories, Kabbalah, and most worryingly, Nazi imagery and symbolism. This was not, as Bowie explains, a happy time.
Ever since I was a kid, I'd been into exploring my spiritual side of life. It's very important to me, and always has been. This time, an unfortunate confluence of situations was a fast dawning interest in the Kabbalah and magic and drug taking. It's a lethal combination. And I got very drawn into the writings of people like Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky, and some of the more esoteric magicians. The esoteric and ancient and secret rites of the Tibetan Buddhists sort of stuck me in a netherworld that was unholy, and I demonized myself, I think, during that period, and created many psychic wounds, which I think took me many years to heal.
Turn on the thin white tube, throwing darts in lovers' eyes.
It did make for compelling and disturbing lyrics, mainly on Station to Station, a paranoid, soulless but brilliant funk record that Bowie still alleges he has no memory of recording at all. Generally, flirting with Nazi imagery and being so out of your mind you can't remember recording an album is a sign to sort yourself out. And that's just what Bowie did. And this time, it was a place that inspired him. That was part 1 of Bowie's Heroes on 6 Music. Join me, Matt Everett, tomorrow at midnight for part 2, when we look at the people who inspired Bowie throughout his stay in Berlin and right up to the present day.